Guys, I'm Joseph, a second year medical student,
And I'm Evan, a third year medical student.
and today we're just going to be going over the method that got me a 131, Evan a 132 on the Chem Phys section. We're going to be making more videos for the other sections of the MCAT. Right now, we're just going to tackle the Chem Phys section. And we both went to Texas Christian University. I graduated the year after him, and I saw that he did good on the MCAT, so I went to him and I said, what did you do? And he kind of shared his method with me, and then I used that, tweaked some things, and overall, we kind of just came up with this great method that got us both very good scores, and we want to share it with you guys today. So step one to this is going to be do every UWorld question twice. And I know this sounds like a lot, but the MCAT is not really a test on how much content you know. And you'll also notice that our step one doesn't include content review. And that's because your content review should be strategically what you are getting wrong from questions. And we'll get into that later. But essentially, your 4 years of undergrad should be looked at as content review, and you're all ready to start doing questions. And believe it or not, you know a lot more than you think. And so just work on that confidence and just get into doing UWorld questions, because this is more of an exam on thought process and understanding the AAMC logic and just honing your test taking abilities. So basically, by doing all the questions twice, you're going to see the ones that you get wrong, but also your second time around, you're going to be doing the ones that maybe you got right, but you got right for the wrong reasons. So if you get them wrong a second time, you know that you probably just guessed on it the first time. So this helps a lot because it's going to let you really focus on what you missed and why you missed it. And it's also, by strictly doing the only ones that you know you got wrong, it's going to completely throw you off balance, and you're not going to be in your natural rhythm because you're going to be in that mentality of, oh, I got this one wrong, so I just got to be careful when answering this question. That's not how you want to do it. You want to make sure it's your natural test taking ability. So I would just do all of them, still mix in right or wrong, blend them up so you don't know which one. Of course, you will recognize which ones you got wrong, but again, just make sure to keep that in mind. The only exception to this is, if you're crunched on time, say you're taking it in a month, then yeah, of course, I would recommend just do the ones you got wrong, because you don't have all the time in the world. And I think the more important part of this step is the correct way to do UWorld questions. It's highly important. It's going to be the biggest factor in your studying. And I'm going to go ahead and let Evan take this one away. Evan, why don't you tell us the correct way to do a UWorld question?
I think when it comes to UWorld questions in particular, they're uniquely valuable for a couple different reasons. And especially for Chem Phys, the way that you approach them can really alter, excuse me, how much you get out of a given problem and out of a given study session, and overall out of the resource as a whole. So let's say, for example, with regard to Chem Phys in particular, you come in thinking of the practice questions as a way to assess your content knowledge. Like, do I know the formulas? Do I know when to use which formulas? Things of that nature. You're going to view them a certain way, you're going to interact with them a certain way, and you're going to be critical in a certain way of the ones you got wrong, kind of like Joe was mentioning, of maybe the extent to which you try and determine why you got something wrong. So essentially what I'm trying to convey is that the way you come into a problem has a lot of impact on what you get out of it and your kind of perspective going in. So the best way to approach a UWorld question in our combined experience is, again, particularly with respect to Chem Phys, but it can be applied to all the different categories, is to view it as trying to break the problem down into all the things that have to go your way in order for you to get the question right. So for example, in Chem Phys, there are very, very clear patterns, especially in the physics section, between different types of questions that require different types of thinking and different types of information recall. And this is something you can pick up on with practice. If you just kind of do enough problems, you naturally start to notice these things. And so with UWorld questions, I think it's always important to Be mindful when doing them. If you get a question right, figure out why you got it right. If you get a question wrong, figure out why you got it wrong. And UWorld also is somewhat unique in that it's a bit of a hybrid resource between content review and practice questions because their explanations are so good, especially if you're doing them in tutor mode, which is something that, especially for early MCAT studying, early to mid phase of your MCAT studying, I definitely recommend the tutor mode on UWorld. That's going to be huge. And it's because it allows you, like Joe was saying, to do that very targeted content review immediately after having gotten the question wrong. So you can really cleanly close the loop on what's this question? Do I know how to answer it? If not, what would need to have been true about my method, my knowledge, in order for me to have gotten it right, and in order to maximize the probability that I get it right the next time? So when approaching your world questions, especially for first pass, and depending on how much time you have, how many questions you have left, when your exam is, etc., there's a number of strategies you can employ to get the most out of every single wrong or right answer choice and all the your world information. But that's something I think that we're going to go into in a little bit more depth in future videos.
Yeah, no, well said. We're going to be doing, of course, our own breakdown of UWorld passages and MCAT passages for you guys to kind of let you guys see what our thought process is. But again, it's kind of like, shooting a free throw in basketball or hitting a golf ball. You know, explaining it is one thing, but it only matters to you and how you think about it with your approach, because this is more of a practice thing rather than a how much you know kind of thing. Um, but yeah, we're gonna get more into that in future videos. But very well said. Um, Evan, do you think that students should be doing on their first pass untimed, where they are just trying to take as much time to figure out the correct way to break down a problem, or do you think they should be simulating it like a actual exam and time themselves to, or should there be like a balance? What are your opinions on that?
It depends. I mean, it depends on the individual. For some people, time is a very relevant factor, and it's something that they need to take into consideration when they're practicing, even from potentially a very early stage. If your world questions are routinely taking you 3 or more real focused minutes on average, because obviously the first one's going to be higher because you have to read the passage, but if it's really taking you that long per question, then absolutely time is something you should consider. I'm a big proponent of the idea that you should do it right before trying to do it fast, but at some point that specificity is going to come into play and be a real factor. So I guess my answer would be it depends. If you're kind of close enough, I think getting rid of that time pressure can allow you to get higher quality studying in, but simultaneously, it's not a factor that should be completely ignored. And if you're an individual who has a predisposition towards taking longer, then that is maybe a mode you're going to want to consider, but not necessarily if it comes at the cost of getting in quality practice and really understanding why you're getting passages right or wrong.
I 100% agree. At your very beginning, I think you should, at at least be doing it untimed. Really just trying to hone your logic and understand how these test makers want you to think. And then when you start getting comfortable with it and you start understanding more of a pattern about how they're being asked, then start to put time in as a factor. But you want to build those good skills and habits before you start timing yourself. Because if you don't build those good skills and habits, time is, if anything, going to start building bad habits. So you really want to make sure you've got the fundamentals down before you start adding that added element of time. Um, and then so that takes us into step two. And this is just as important. And in fact, if you don't do step two, everything you did in step one is almost a waste of time. And step two is logging your questions, right? This is the whole reason you're doing step one. So when you're doing these questions on UWorld or the double AMC, you're going to get a question wrong at some point. Or maybe you get a question right, as we've said before, but it was for the wrong reasons. What you're going to do is two things when it comes to writing down the question you miss. You are going to categorize the question. Was it a graph interpretation question? Was it a logic of the experiment? What were they trying to test in the experiment? Was it, you're going to categorize that, what the question was. And then after that, you're going to take some time figuring out why you missed it. So maybe you just didn't understand the structure of valine and you got that wrong because you put tryptophan. So write down if it was a content gap. That would be an example of a content gap. Maybe you misread the question or answer choice. So when you're reviewing it, you go, oh, I thought it was asking this, but it was actually asking this. And then that's actually a very common reason that I see students missing questions on the MCAT is they're not really slowing down and figuring out what the question is asking and the answer choice that is answering that question best. Sometimes it could be just, misreading the study. Maybe they left out, an important part. But again, the point is that you will, by logging your questions, you will start to pick up on errors that you make, and you will essentially find patterns. Oh, maybe I've noticed that all of these are due to the fact that I'm just misreading the question. And that's going to guide your, future questions that you do. And that could be the difference between a high versus a low score for you. Um, and then once you've kind of categorized the questions, why you've missed it, as concise and short as possible, you are going to write down one sentence tip to make sure you never miss this problem again. And this is something Evan always told me when I was studying, because it's very helpful. If you wrote down 5 questions and the sentence for all 5 of those questions that you missed are the same, oh, just slow down and read the question. That's just an example. They're obviously going to be a lot different than that. Then you know that, okay, next step is just incorporating what you learned. And again, these kind of 1, 2, and 3 of step 2, that should be the same amount of time, if not more time, reviewing the question than the time spent doing the question. So you should be spending more time analyzing why you got something wrong than the time it took to take the question or answer the question. So if it takes you 3 minutes to answer, let's say, question 37 on your UWorld practice test, it should take you over 3 minutes, like 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Sometimes it would take me up to, half an hour to figure out why it is, I truly missed something. So reviewing the question, it's very, very valuable part of studying. Evan, is there anything, you'd like to add to that?
I don't think so. I think you got it mostly covered. And in terms of what specific method you should be using to do your review, logging your questions is one. You can write it down, but there's lots of ways, and it's gonna vary off the learner how they specifically want to address their question. Sometimes it's sufficient, and if your brain works that way, you can just read the explanation and maybe it sticks. For most people, I think some kind of written modality is useful. Maybe put it in an Excel spreadsheet. So like Joe said, you can kind of search for commonality in the reading. In any case, the main point is you want to be critically thinking about what went wrong, what can be improved, sort of a little bit of that 1% better every day type philosophy. Because really, I mean, that is kind of the point, is you're trying to sharpen yourself with every block, just become a little better and progressively increase the probability that you get any given question right. And the only real way to do that is to figure out what went wrong, what went right, do more of the good stuff, less of the bad stuff, and kind of just allow it to happen progressively from there.
Mhm. And another, tip that I also found helpful is I think you should be reviewing it right after you miss it. That's why tutoring mode is so great. But sometimes maybe it's just brain fog or it's really just not making sense. So I would often review the question right after, and also like maybe at a later time, maybe the day after, I would also additionally, review it with a new fresh mindset and see, okay, that was very silly of me to think that way. I don't know how I made that error. And you may also just see that maybe you're getting the later questions incorrect because your mind is tired and you know that you just got to work on your mental stamina. So that brings us into step 3. And you've done your questions, you've not only learned what you need to fix when you're logging your questions, but you've applied what you've learned. Okay, that's very important. It doesn't matter, all the, mistakes you've made. If you don't implement those tips that you've told yourself, then it's again all for nothing. All of these steps are essential. You can't do, one without doing two and three. You can't. So they're all, you need to actually not only learn, but you need to apply what you've learned the next time you're doing a problem. So with step three, you're going to assess if how you're studying is working. If you're reviewing these and you've truly, you know, if you figured out what you're doing wrong, and you're going to test that. And full links, as Evan would always say, are one of the most important resources that you have. They are the most valuable study resource, the ones from the AMC that you have, and you need to use those very strategically. And so I sort of came up with kind of like a formula, and that how often you should be taking these. So basically, you're going to have the time until your MCAT. In this example, we'll say it's in 4 months. I have 4 AMC full lengths that I have yet to take, which means 4 divided by 4. There's going to be 1 month in between every full length. And that 1 month is going to be similar to what we did on step 1 and 2, where we took UWorld questions and then we reviewed them and we logged the questions. You're going to do the same thing with your practice full length. And you're going to look for patterns, why you got something wrong. Was it content? Was it, oh, I'm not reading the studies carefully? And again, we're going to do video breakdowns of how we answer those questions and how we do practice problems and stuff like that. Essentially, you're going to figure out what you did wrong and what you need to fix. Then you're going to spend that next month fixing those mistakes, and then again, you're going to take another full length. Now, again, say it was content you missed. You're going to want to make sure, say you missed 5 questions and they were all because you didn't know the equations related to buoyancy. You need to know how to implement those the next time you take the full length, or you shouldn't be taking your next full length practice, because the whole point of those full lengths is, okay, I've learned from my mistakes, I've practiced, and, essentially you're just trying to fix before you go into the next full length. And then also with full lengths, everyone who did well would always tell me that you need to be treating it exactly as if it's going to be your official score. So time, if you're taking your official MCAT at 8 a.m., you need to be taking your practice full length at 8 a.m. Obviously, you can't take it at the same location, but you need to set up a similar environment where it's quiet, you don't have your phone, you can concentrate. If you know what you're going to eat that morning of the MCAT, and it sounds silly, but you need to figure out stuff like that, like everything. Know what your food is, and that's what you're going to eat before your practice full length. And everything, time you wake up, you're going to want to treat it like it's the real thing, because again, practice makes perfect, and the best practice is simulating to the actual thing. So yeah, and then we're just going to address some frequently asked questions. Evan, of course, is one of these is, what resources should I use? And of course, Evan's very passionate about this one because, I've been frustrated with the amount of money I've wasted on these courses that, promise you good scores, but, Evan, I'm sure, you have too. And we've come to the realization, just like a lot of top scorers, you really don't need those expensive courses that you see on advertisements. You really just need Anki for memorizing that stuff that you missed on your practice questions, that, oh, I need to content review that. Also, like the Miles Down deck for PsychSoc for learning those important concepts, UWorld for practice, AMC for tracking progress, and also practice. They've got a lot of practice questions and question banks that, of course, I think you should do those. The more AMC questions, the better. And yeah, so Evan, are there any other, important things you want to say about resources you should use, and, the overstimulation and the over availability of just all these resources that, are thrown sort of?
Yeah, people definitely get resource fatigue and decision fatigue, and they end up having a bunch of different things at their disposal and not fully utilizing any of them. When in reality, like, yeah, just having a few really quality things. If you're like, if you really want to do extra content, if you're maybe really prone to wanting a bunch of like rote memorization, or not rote memorization, but like spaced repetition type stuff. Anki's great. Anki's obviously big in medical school, so it's good to get acquainted with that technology in any case. UWorld, I mean, it's, the main thing I always tell people to use. Huge, huge fan of UWorld for the MCAT. And again, also something that's highly relevant once you get to medical school. And then AMC, it's irreplaceable. These are not free resources. Anki's free, but UWorld and AMC, I kind of view them as, I almost think they're so necessary, especially the AMC, but really UWorld, that I almost think like people should think of them as a cost of taking the exam,
Yeah.
because it's not really worth it for most people. Like you can, don't get me wrong, you can do well without doing UWorld, and I'm sure there are lots of people who have great scores and didn't use UWorld, but these resources are sufficient to reproducibly create very good scores. And I think they can work for a lot of people, very flexible to a lot of different learning styles. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can study correctly for the MCAT, but there's even more ways you can study incorrectly.
Hmm.
And I mean, like, obviously, worst case scenario is you're using something like Kaplan, in my opinion, which is just a really bad resource. But like, I mean, again, like people get confused and they don't know what to use. And so I think the simplicity of just a few and knowing what each resource is for, and then working just very diligently to get the most out of it. I mean, like Joe said, use UWorld twice. Like instead of going and doing the Kaplan bank, do UWorld again, and you're probably, my opinion, definitely going to be getting more out of it than you're going to be getting out of pretty much almost any other question bank available.
And
So in terms of the full lengths, yeah, yeah, Joe, sorry, you were going to say?
oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like doing the entire UWorld once is gonna be a challenge, in of itself. If you only have 6 months to study for the MCAT, and it takes you 2 months to do that Princeton review, or Kaplan, then that's less time you're gonna have for UWorld and AMC. Trust me, if you're doing the questions quality, if you're taking time and effort and really doing them, you're having intentional, thoughtful studying. Um, you're gonna UWorld and AMC is gonna be taking up all of your time. And Anki for understanding those key concepts for like behavioral science and maybe some like biochem facts like amino acids and stuff like that. So yeah, really all your time should be spent between those two, UWorld and AMC, when it comes to doing questions. And yeah, that's Evan made a very good point. There's right ways to study for the MCAT, and most students that think they're not capable of doing well, it's not that they're not capable, it's that they've been studying so much and so hard the wrong way that, and it's the ways that, these courses are offered from people, that, aren't really applying to go to med school. They haven't really taken the MCAT and done well. Those people have created those courses, and so they're selling for a lot of money. Take my course and you'll do well. And so people, follow this advice and they study the wrong way. But a lot of times, MCAT really is just about studying the right way. And I think that was a very good point Evan made. And so, Evan, what would you say if someone comes to you and says like, okay, I'm still not improving. I followed the method you guys have talked about. What should they do?
I mean, it's going to be case by case.
Hmm.
You could definitely, like it says on the slide here, you could reach out to a qualified tutor, kind of get a diagnostic analysis of why you in particular are struggling to improve. There's a lot of kind of self-analysis you can do. But really, I mean, it is like you said, I think most people who get to the point of being ready to take the MCAT and have passed all their prereqs, it's not really a matter of competency. It's oftentimes a matter of fit with their study material. You have to manage expectations. You have to have a good timeline. I mean, I've never seen someone who, with a proper timeline and proper resources, and once they kind of worked out the kinks of their study plan and were actually able to do the things that are fairly provably going to improve your score, they weren't able to at least get their score into a relatively competitive range. I mean, not everyone needs to be getting, very, very high scores. And not everyone, in fact, is even planning on trying to do that. But it is sort of a matter of, I mean, it would be just too individual to give a blanket
Yeah.
recommendation, really. It's it could be obviously very frustrating, and I think the worst thing you could do is go and start using third party resources. I mean, I think, like, for example, I did like one of the Kaplan full lengths, and my score was just
Yeah.
terrible on that. It was
Yeah.
the lowest full length score I got.
Yeah.
So I think be careful about what resources you're using. But I mean, it would just there's not really one answer to this question. Usually, usually it's something isn't actually being done to the fullest extent that it could be, intentionally or otherwise. So I think it would just be case by case.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's it's so different to, how everyone has been studying in undergrad, where their professor will say, okay, if you know all this, then, you know, you'll get an A on the exam. MCAT, it's a little different. Everyone knows, a lot of people know pretty much everything there is to know content wise on the MCAT, but this is more of an exam of testing your, thinking and problem solving abilities, and not what do you know versus not know. So that's why doing practice questions, which some people might not have even done at all in undergrad, practice questions are very important for this. And it's sort of like a win-win situation, because by doing more practice questions, you're not only sharpening your skills if you're doing the steps that we told you to, but you're also learning the content at the same time. So that's why we really don't recommend the traditional, oh, I'm going to do 1 month of content review. We don't recommend that. Your content review will be doing the question. And of course, the only exception to that is if you have no idea or were never taught, what the question is asking. In that case, then you might need to, you know, maybe watch a YouTube video or whatever it may be. But yeah, if you really, you should try to save your money, figure out what you're doing wrong, because you're smart enough to figure out and change your study method. If you were able to do it in those hard prereqs, you're able to do it for the MCAT. But let's say you're crunched on time, then definitely reach out to a tutor, because they can certainly assist you, and make sure they're qualified. Make sure there's someone who got a score that you would want yourself. Don't just go to these very popular third party companies. Just, again, reach out to a qualified tutor. Wisant has, that's one resource that you can reach out to tutors. And yeah, so in the future we will be doing passage breakdowns. We're going to be making a similar PowerPoint like this for the other sections, like biochem, uh, behavioral sciences, cars. It's a pretty weird section. It's one of those things that we're probably not going to be making a PowerPoint. We might do some passage breakdowns, but it's one of those sections that it's hard to teach it to someone. It's one of those things you just got to learn. But if you have any other questions, comment. Just comment, and we'll try to get to you as fast as possible, or reach out to us. We'll put our email in the description, and yeah, be sure to subscribe for more.